Hi, my name is Whitney and I'm here today with my colleague Alissa Brooke. We work with the VCU Rehabilitation Research and Training Center, and we're here today to present on tips for employers working with employees with autism spectrum disorder. This is part 2 of a 2-part presentation. Part 1, we talked a little bit about introducing autism and also what skills and abilities that they can bring to the workplace. And today we're going to talk about the second half of what it could be like to hire an individual with autism, some of the supports that you have in place, and also introduce a very valuable resource, somebody called a job coach. So first, after part 1, you might be interested in hiring somebody with autism to come to your workforce. These are just some this is not an exhaustive list, just some basic steps that you could consider if you are interested in hiring an individual with a disability, specifically someone with autism or really any type of disability. First, you could reach out to employer services organizations, VCU Business Connections, and we have actually their website on the last page of this presentation as a resource for you to go to. Employer service organizations work with individuals with disabilities to help them to find employment, and also not only to find employment, but also to support them once they have found the right job match. And we're going to be getting into a lot more specifics on that in a few minutes. You could also sign up for a diversity awareness training. Again, we'll have resources for that on the last page of this presentation, but we have free online diversity awareness trainings. Or you could also contact an employer services organization and they would be happy to come to your place of business and provide a disability awareness training. And what's really neat about those is that sometimes you can even get continuing education credits for receiving trainings like that in the workplace. You could also start to network with local community service agencies. Vocational rehabilitation agencies this can get very convoluted, so we're trying to keep it simple, but oftentimes provide any sort of funding to employment service organizations and also to support the individuals with disabilities as they're entering the workforce and receiving any training that they're going to need to be successful in the workplace. Community service boards also work with individuals with disabilities and would be able to provide access to employment services. And finally, local school systems. We talked a little bit about this in part 1, but there are currently lots of federal initiatives and funding being directed to support vocational rehabilitation agencies, employer services organizations, and school systems to support individual students really with disabilities to enter into work rather than into other types of segregated settings. And also you can communicate with an employment specialist who it is our job to go out into the community and actually really contact you before you need to contact us to start to find jobs for individuals with disabilities.
And the term employment specialist is one that we use, but we've already started this presentation saying job coach. So there are a couple of terms that you'll hear us say today, probably interchangeably. Employment specialist, job coach, sometimes referred to as a consultant or a job developer as well.
I think job coach refers to how long Alissa and I have been in the field, and that's what we started using when we got started. Mm-hmm. Here, we're going to talk a brief definition of supported employment. And in general, when you work with individuals with disabilities, this is the service that they will be receiving in order to enter into the workforce. Supported employment supports individuals with disabilities to obtain real work for real pay. So obtaining competitive work in integrated settings. That means that individuals with disabilities are just as likely to interact with an individual with a disability as an individual without a disability. They have access to positions where they will earn more, ideally more than minimum wage, and also have access to promotions and advancements in the workforce. Supported employment was designed for individuals with significant disabilities with no or intermittent work histories and who, because of the nature of their disability, need ongoing support services in order to ensure success. That doesn't necessarily sound like a winning combination for somebody that you want coming into your workforce, but I think if you listen to part 1, you'll see that there are tons of benefits, and we didn't even talk about all of them, to hiring individuals with disabilities. And also, as we start to talk about a job coach, there are lots of supports to not only support you as an employer, but also the individual with a disability. And some of the stages of supported employment that a job coach supports employers and also individuals with disabilities with are the job search, finding the job, training on the job, supporting the individual and the employer to ensure retention, and all of this is provided by an employment specialist. So now we're going to, in here we have the term job coach, while we also talk about employment specialist, employment consultant, or job developer. These are some of the many hats that a job coach can wear, and I think it's important to say that all of these different roles that a job coach can provide not only serve and support the individual with a disability, but they are also roles that support you as an employer as you are onboarding an individual with a disability to enter into your workforce. First, a job coach can be considered a planner. They support the customer to develop their profile, their interests and abilities, start to plan out what that job search is going to look like, and then they can perform a similar role within your organization to start to plan out what this job, what the tasks are going to look like, what the schedule is going to look like, things like that. A job coach is also a consultant. They are a resource for you to go to when you have questions about working with individuals with disabilities, about what type of an employee, what type of skills and abilities would be a good fit after they've met with you to identify what your needs are as an employer, what needs and tasks aren't being met currently within your organization, that they have somebody that will be able to fulfill that role. We also, we're kind of like headhunters. We typically have, it can be anywhere from a small client pool to a large client pool of individuals that we have taken the time with to learn their skills, learn their abilities, identify their motivations, what their career aspirations are, and then we've also spent the time getting to know the community and the businesses within the community and identifying what their needs are, and then we start to make that match and develop those relationships. We can also be technicians. Alissa and I are not the most tech-savvy technicians, but we have resources for that. We work with the employees. The goal is for the individuals to integrate into the workforce as fully as possible, and sometimes individuals with autism and disabilities need certain compensatory strategies or extra supports in order to do that. It can be a visual support, a visual schedule. Sometimes they're on their phones or their iPads, so they're not very apparent to other individuals. But we are responsible for working with you guys to find out what you need to get done, and then developing any types of supports that the individual needs to perform that job to your expectations. And then finally, a job coach can also be a community resource for disability awareness training, diversity initiatives, any sort of presentations that we do lunch and learns, meet and greets to introduce what we do, what our organization does, and also introduce some of our individuals with disabilities who are looking for employment. Do you have anything to add to those roles?
Not necessarily. When you were talking about being a headhunter, we do have a large client pool, and I think so much of the making a good job match is just one of the most important things. And so we're really not looking to find somebody. We don't have one individual that we're working with and just trying to, fit them into a business just so that they can get a job. We really want to make sure that we're making a good match for that person's skills, personality, the type of environment that they're looking for. So it's going to be a major benefit to you for us to understand what your business needs are in the first place.
And what the hiring process can look like. These steps are not necessarily in order. They can go out of order depending on how the relationship between the job coach, the individual with a disability, and the employer looks like and how it got started. But in general, one of the first things you're going to do is meet with an employment specialist, where you're going to see a lot of those roles that we talked about in the previous slide come into play. They're going to sit down with you. They might do a lot of question sessions about what your business does, learn more about what you need, what jobs aren't getting done, what you need more of in the workplace in order to have a more successful business. They will also, through this meeting, start to identify and discuss potential needs that you may have.
And the meeting may not just be a meeting. It might not be a sit down. What seems to be one of the most effective ways is for us to have a conversation and then get up and sort of start to walk around the business and ask questions. Who does that? And maybe we can help identify some needs that you may not even have been aware of.
We will also start to, depending on how the meeting is going, discuss meeting the potential applicant or individual that we have in mind in order to meet your needs. This doesn't always look like a formal interview. It could be an informal conversation where maybe we decide to bring the individual by to take a tour of your business, just like we had done with you. Or maybe it's a working interview where we bring the individual in to demonstrate some of their skills and abilities. And sometimes it's a job shadow, sometimes it's just an informational interview. So this initial meeting can look very different depending on the relationship. It's an individualized process. At some point in time, the application process begins. Sometimes the application has already been put into the business, and sometimes we put the application in after we have met with you as the employer. And then the onboarding process will begin. And typically the onboarding process for an individual with a disability looks just the same as for any other typically developing individual that you're going to be hiring into your business. Now, what is different is that you have some extra resources to support you with this process.
So speaking of the extra resource, that in this case would be the employment specialist. What might be different about working with an individual with a disability? We highlight the employment specialist as probably the #1 difference that you're going to see. Typically, the employment specialist is going to meet the employer first and begin to develop that relationship again so that we really understand what your business needs are, so we can find somebody who's going to be a good fit to satisfy those needs. The employment specialist, as Whitney said before, has 2 customers, 2 clients. While we are working with the individual with a disability, just as important, we are working with the business. We want to satisfy both of your needs. An employment specialist, as Whitney said, may assist in the interview and the application process. Some people who have a job coach prefer not to have the job coach sit in the interview process. So again, we can't say a blanket statement that the job coach is always going to sit in the interview, but they probably will have some role, at least in the coordination of the interview, if that's the case. Again, the interview and application process can look very different depending on the type of job that it's going to be and the individual that you're working with. The wonderful thing about doing a working interview is that the individual with autism is able to demonstrate what their skills and abilities are. As we spoke about in the first webcast that we did, or the first part of this, the people with autism have challenges with social and communication. And so sitting down at a table and doing a formal back and forth interview may really give you no impression of the type of work and the type of employee that an individual with autism can be and how well they can do their job. Marketing and talking about themselves can be really challenging. And so the employment specialist often will try to suggest that they come in so that you can actually meet them and so they can demonstrate that, so you get really a real impression of how well they can be as an employee and fit into your organization. The employment specialist will support on-the-job training. So now we've kind of jumped from the application process to being hired. With on-the-job training, the individual will come into your business and will, receive the typical training, but the employment specialist will be there to support that and provide any additional training that is needed. We'll create any supports needed to facilitate independence. Our goal as an employment specialist is not to be an extra person in your business. Our goal is to get out of there as quickly as possible, but only when the individual and the employer are ready for us to be gone. So we get in there, and from day one, we're thinking, how can we help this individual to be independent at work and to satisfy their job needs and meet the expectations of the employer. So we will create any supports in order for that person to do that, whether it's a schedule or a visual tool. Sometimes our visual tools are how to do the job. Sometimes our visual tools or videos may be about appropriate social interactions to have in the workplace and appropriate behavior, who to ask questions to, understanding the social hierarchy, that you don't go to the owner of the business if you have a question, but maybe you have to go to your coworker first and then a manager, and we can teach things like that. We are very focused as the employment specialist on the long-term relationship. The job coach, while I said it's our goal to get out of there, we're never really gone. So that's a benefit of supported employment, is that the job coach will continue to support the individual and the employer for the duration of that individual's employment there. We will continue to check in at least 2 times a month, whether it's in person or by phone. We would discuss with the employer and the individual what their preferences are. We are able to come back in and monitor performance, troubleshoot if there are any issues. Our main goal is retention. So I started to touch on what else can a job coach help with. Diversity training and awareness to existing staff. We can come in up front and do that, even before you have hired somebody, but when you hire somebody with autism, we can also come back in and, do more specific, individual specific training. Of course, we're going to talk to that person about their disclosure preferences, but we will teach you as much as we're able to teach you about the best ways to work with that specific individual. We can troubleshoot. If, everything is off to a great start and the job coach begins to fade out of the job site, but problems begin to arise, you call us. We come back in and we help put any other additional supports or have conversations to rectify, whatever the challenge was. We can help the individual coordinate transportation. Many of the people that we work with do not have their driver's licenses or, drive themselves to work. So we can work with that person to make sure that they have a dependable ride, get there on time, public transportation, coordinating that with the family, whoever's going to provide the transportation. Again, we can help to develop a work schedule and identify the tasks that the person will complete in the workplace. What we often do is we take we take a list of tasks that may have no structure, and we structure them and put them into a schedule. One person that we work with, part of his job is to check the faxes and to distribute them to the appropriate person in the office that he works in. When we first started to work with him, this was really challenging. He would check the faxes 1 time in the day and feel like he was done. And so we just created a schedule for him. We put on his phone an alarm to, every, I can't even remember, 25 minutes or whatever to check the faxes. And so we can structure something that is seemingly unstructured. We can also assist with any education or training for the employee with a disability. So, we understand that many businesses have continuing eds or, yearly trainings that need to be done. Whether they're computer trainings or whatever they are, we're able to come in and assist with that and to facilitate the conversation and communication when it's time for yearly evaluations and things like that as well. We just wanted to share one case study of an individual with autism who was hired into a workplace. In this particular case, this business had an interest in starting a recycling initiative. They wanted to go green. And they didn't have an existing position, but they reached out to an employment specialist and said, we really feel like this would be a great role for somebody that you work with to come in and satisfy within our business. So the job coach, pretty much following that list which Whitney already shared, the job coach initially met with the green team, found out what it is that they would like. They wanted their recycling cans and batteries to be picked up throughout the entire organization, which had 7 floors, really, really, really large organization. And so first we met with them, determined what their business needs were, what the job might look like, and then we went back to our pool of individuals that we work with to say who would do really well with this. Well, when you're going into multiple offices, that needs to be a somewhat social position, social person. You need to be organized, you need to be able to work independently, orient around a large building. And so we went back to our pool and we found somebody who we thought would satisfy that need. So we helped the business, actually, because this position didn't already exist, we helped the business lay out what that new job description would look like. Once that was done, we were able to help that individual apply for the job. Interview, which in this case was a working interview. He got to try it out, make sure that he would like it and that the employer would like it and him. And then we were able to help him get trained once he was hired on the job. So the person that you see there, we'll call him Craig. That is him at work. The bottom part of his cart is all of the recycling, which he has picked up from the floors, and the top part of his cart looks like all of the batteries, which he had to pick up. So on the right-hand side, I acknowledge that it's pretty small, but what we wanted to show you here is that the job coach created a tool, created really, like we were talking about, a schedule. So what you see there is at the top, it's a blue symbol to show this is the recycling cans that you need to pick up, and a green symbol to show these are where you need to pick up the batteries. And we just broke it down. We toured throughout that entire building, put recycling cans where they needed to be, educated the staff that they were now supposed to put their recycling in those cans, and we made this checklist so that the individual could very systematically just go, about his work each day and keep track of what he was able to get done. So again, a very unstructured position. We really helped them to develop, and it really helped to satisfy a need for them.
And I think it really was a win-win situation. It was a great job match for the individual with a disability who had these skills that Alissa was mentioning, but also for the business. They were getting dinged because of the amount of waste that was being sent to trash centers in the area, and also the amount of inappropriate waste that was being sent to the wrong places. And then they were also able to receive, I believe, some federal money for initiating this Going Greener recycling initiative. So this is where you start to think of how it's a win for the individual with a disability who's entering integrated employment, and it's also a win for the business. They're receiving an individual with these great skill sets, and it really helps them to meet their bottom line and to run more efficiently.
Good point.
Thanks, Whitney. So thanks for joining us for part 2 of educating employers on working with individuals with autism in the workplace. Thanks.